Okay. Let's see how I did this. One wire goes through here, and then... Wait. Huh? How the hell did I do this? Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled German King Tiger heavy tank. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the tank's turret detailing, as well as also to some of the other turret components. We'll be going over all of these additions and modifications in this video, so stay tuned because there's going to be a bunch of content coming right at you. Picking up where we last left off in the other video takes us directly to the front turret armor plate. Like I stated in the last video, the turret has the rotor mounted, the rotor pivot ball, the mantlet which is yet to be mounted, and also the coaxial machine gun plug. On the kit here, you'll see that there's this very substantial hole that's partway milled into this really thick aluminum plate. The hole is there so that you can drop in this insert that is supplied with the kit. This piece here is made from a single turning of CNC aluminum, and note it has the bottom base to plug in, and also you can see the guard detailing that's integrally milled into the aluminum. The piece just drops directly into place, and then once done you have the detailing that is required. As you can see from trying to put it on, the tolerances do fit, but they are very, very tight. So much so that I'm just going to go ahead and remove a slight bit amount of material here with the Dremel and a sanding drum. You really don't need to remove too much, just enough for the piece to slide into place. After that, adhesives are going to do the rest. Well, after a few passes with the Dremel and the sanding drum that I have here, or in this case a miniature high-speed removal bit, the piece you'll see just drops directly into place without any problems. One thing to watch out for is you want to have the piece be a nice flush fit, because you are going to have to do a little bit of body work around here in order to flare everything in. And obviously if you have a ridge sticking up over the surface, it's going to hurt the look of the piece. With the piece installed, you can see that it's going into its bodywork phase. Along with the piece, I'm also doing the bodywork for the fastener location holes that I touched upon before. While the red putty is setting on this, so I could go ahead and sand the rest of it down and make a mess, it's now time for me to turn my attention back to the mantlet, and the main gun for that matter. Here we have the barrel now. Note it is all primer gray compared to the last time we saw this, where the whole thing was left in the white coloring. And here we have the back section. Of course, you cannot have any paint on these recesses over here because this is where the thing is going to recoil inside of the trunnion area. The area over here, which is exposed on the model, is also going to need to recoil, but unfortunately you kind of have to have paint on here or else it really does hurt the look. When we put the bushing on, you're going to see that the tolerances are going to be very, very tight, and this is true even when the piece is not painted. So this is something you definitely have to pay attention to. On these recoil systems, they seem to work the best when you have really a lot of tolerances opening up between the surfaces here on the tube and the surfaces here on the bushing. In order to do this, you can do this a multitude of different ways. In the past, I've used a Dremel with a sanding drum, and I just basically removed the amount of material until the piece basically was able to slide in perfectly. On this one here, since it's off, I could try this on the lathe and remove some material on the inside portion. We'll do a neater job compared to the Dremel, but if you do not have a machine lathe, you know, the Dremel will work just fine. This is the type of thing where the only way to verify if it works or not is just trial and error, and you keep going and going and going till finally you're at the point where the thing is working. Back to the main tube itself, one thing I want to stress is that when you're building the model and testing it, the thing will start working on you at some point. But you have to pay attention to the thicknesses of paint that are applied to the barrel as the build goes onward. Namely, when the build comes to the end and you put the base coat and the camo and all that good stuff on, you want to make sure that the paint applied to the barrel is as thin as humanly possible, or else you're going to be basically redoing the enlargement steps that I just touched upon now. So this is definitely something to pay attention to, specifically if you have the Armortek recoil systems. So here's the bushing with the tolerances now opened up. If I take the barrel, slide inside, you'll see just how loose the piece fits, and this is exactly what you want. Might sound counterintuitive, but with the piece having the loose tolerances like this, this is going to require less effort for the servo to actually pull this thing back and return it. Keep in mind, this one here specifically has a really crazy long barrel with it, and this adds to the weight. So any place where you could cut down resistance is going to help the part function in the long run. Aside from the bushing, I also went ahead and cleaned up a little bit on the inside portion here of the mantlet itself. If I go ahead and slide the bushing in place, on the inside here, the way this thing was milled out was that a end mill went from one side, stopped, pulled back, they flipped the mantlet over, and then they resumed milling, and that's how they were able to drill it out. Well, the piece was not 100% concentric, so that the hole was there, but there was a little bit of an off shift on the machining. Because of this, when I was testing the piece, the barrel was hanging up and making contact with the part that was offset. So what I went ahead and did was, with the Dremel, with a proper sanding drum, I went ahead and just loosened up the material on the inside, and basically I polished down the area where the two halves were slightly askew. It wasn't a whole lot, but there was just a tiny little ridge that was snagging up on the barrel. I'm going to go ahead and assemble it now so we can go ahead and test it to see what it looks like with the piece now, with all of its modifications made. So I'm going to take the tube now, slide it in. Should just self-index. And there we go. As you can see, it's nice and smooth with the travel. It's not grinding or binding. And so far, this appears to be what the servo is going to be able to handle. But this is really just in the abstract, because I'm going to really find out once I actually get the servo strapped in and everything linked up. And then we'll see if the piece is going to function properly. But so far, this is actually a really good sign. Before I could go ahead and permanently secure the bushing in place, I need to go ahead and make some revisions to the mantlet, some of which I touched upon in the last video. Number one would be the carving out of this rib that we have right here. You see, like I mentioned in the last video, this piece here is all integrally casted out of aluminum. And the piece has all of the appropriate details and ridges in place. But on this little section here, looks like the mold tore off, and because of that, this area, which would normally be a nice molded in ridge, is filled in with extra material. This is something that's extremely easily removed, and once done, it's going to improve the look of the mantlet tenfold. The best way to remove it is, well, with an angle grinder. This might seem a little overkill, but the groove here is the same thickness, or relatively the same thickness, as one of these cutting discs for the angle grinders. So all I gotta do is just carefully go ahead and just eat away the material that's blocking the channel. If you are uncomfortable with using an angle grinder for this for one reason or another, the same technique can still be utilized with a Dremel with a cutting stone, specifically, oddly enough, one of those fiberglass cutting stones, and you can just do the same procedure, and both routines, or I should say both techniques, will lead you to the exact same result. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this same procedure was needed on my other Armortek King Tiger, and was basically remedied in the same manner. So this is something that might be present in the molds that Armortek uses to cast these pieces. Hard to say. If you do have something like this, and you do not have the nerve or the tools on hand to perform this procedure, just leave it alone. Don't mess with it. It's best to leave it in this format as opposed to attempt it and screw it up. Luckily on this one over here, the crud is only on the bottom portion of the mantlet, so it's really not that visible. But since you are tuning into an ECA video, this is going to be something that I am going to address. Before I go ahead and actually do the procedure, I'm going to go ahead and mask and put my headphones on, just to protect my ears, because the angle grinder is pretty loud in the shop, and also the respirators for reasons that should be all too obvious. So I'm going to cut across to when I'm actually digging into the metal. And presto, without a whole lot of elbow grease, the channel is now carved in and looks pretty much seamless with the remainder of the piece. And well, we can now go ahead and progress with the video. Bouncing back to the turret itself, at this point here, I can start with the surface texturing and detailing. The first thing that I went ahead and did was I wrapped up basically the bodywork. The bodywork consisted of plugging up the fastener locations that I've touched upon in earlier videos. At this point here, you can see that the fastener location holes are thoroughly blended in, except for these ones here on the front that I'll touch upon momentarily. If I pan the turret to the front, you can see the plug is completely fused in, as well as the other holes that, again, were touched upon earlier in this video. Outside of the deletion of the fastener holes, at this point I'm now etching the torch cut lines found on the various sections where the plates would interconnect on the real vehicle. The technique is the same technique that I touched upon in an earlier video. Basically, I use a Dremel with a cutting disc on here, and I just randomly go and gouge lines into the appropriate locations. This is to simulate the rough torch cut lines which would be present on the real vehicle. On the one here on the front, you can see that I added a little bit of masking tape here just to prevent or protect slightly the surface directly next to the section that's getting its torch cut lines. If you do have a few that go slightly over the perimeter, fear not, because sculpted weld beads are going to be added, which are going to cover up any of the areas that we have right here. The cut lines have been added to the front as well as to the rear puzzle sections. But I went ahead and added them to these two locations that we have towards the bottom of the turret. The reason why these are added is because, well, on the real King Tiger turret, these two sections here would have puzzle sections that would connect the side panel to the lower turret bottom. These two locations are absent on the stock Armortek kit, so in order to add them, it's just going to be an illusion that the pieces are puzzling in those two locations. To do this, I went ahead and marked the two areas. I went ahead and measured them from my other Armortek King Tiger that I've already performed this technique on. And then from there, I marked them with a pencil, and I already started with the torch cut line process. I use the same technique that I touched upon before, and then in order to seal everything and completing the look, I'm going to sculpt some weld beads in these locations, and once complete, it's going to give the illusion that the panel here is applied with the appropriate puzzle sections that are found on the real model. Currently on this side here, the pieces are ready for their sculpted welds, but if I rotate the unit to the opposite side, you can see that I still have to go ahead and apply them to these two locations, which after filming this is going to be quickly taken care of via the Dremel cutting disc technique that I just mentioned. With the torch cut lines completed, the next thing to focus on are the mounts for the top roof, as well as getting the basic top roof assembled itself. The reason why it's important to do that at this point is because if we look at the side here, we still have several large fastener location holes which are used to mount on the brackets. This needs to be blended away with the bodywork prior to me adding the sculpted weld beads, which of course will complete the side detailing of the turret. With the way the Armortek kit is designed, you have 4 of these thick gauge stamped sheet steel brackets that get secured to the 4 locations on the turret. The way the sections work is that you would secure the brackets to the turret, and then the roof panel is simply secured to the brackets via fasteners. The system works very, very well. In fact, this is exactly how I assembled it on my personal King Tiger. However, if you do this, you're not going to be able to get access into the turret. For my build, I basically sealed it up as I really didn't see it necessary for myself to get access into here. However, the customer would like to get access into his model for one reason or another. So for this one here, I'm going to have to redesign it slightly in order to have the top pop on and off. Of course, for this method, I'm going to utilize my magnet trick, which I've utilized on several of my Armortek builds that have been built in the past and showcased on this channel. Me, on the other hand, I personally like to bolt the roofs on permanently because, well, you know, it's honestly less work for me to do. I just secure it, plug up the fastener holes, and I'm good to go. And when it comes to access, well, by and large, I'm able to get some decent access on the inside. I mean, hell, we just saw a recent video where a mouse took a crap inside of my Sherman, and I had to get in there with a vacuum and clean it out. Probably would have been a little bit easier if I was able to top off the roof, but that opens up a discussion for another topic. However, back to the model that we have here. Right now, the mounting brackets are currently in primer. They're painted, and I'm just waiting for the paint to set prior to them being fitted to the model. They have been modified in order for me to secure the magnets, but I'll touch upon those once everything is mounted in place. One other thing I want to mention is with the way the roof gets assembled. If I go ahead and mount the 3 panels on, give me a second. I think I would know at that point by now. Alright. Okay, with the way the 3 panels get assembled, like I said before, they will be, or they're supposed to be secured to the side of the turret via those straps, but there are also some other straps that keep the 3 panels connected to each other. And those are facilitated by these 2 brackets that we have here. They are kit supply, and they're made out of some really thick gauge steel plate. They're laser cut and pre-bent to shape. They just bolt to these 2 locations here, obviously from the inside. You don't want to mount them on the outside, that's just ridiculous. But once they're fastened in place, again, they'll keep everything where they need to be. For this model, these are going to be utilized because, again, I need to have this plate as one continuous piece in order for it to just come on and off with the magnet method that I already touched upon. Aside from this, one quirk that I did notice with this model here involves the rear panel. If you'll notice, the rear panel is currently sticking up and doesn't lock into place fully. This is because this panel here, for one reason or another, it's slightly larger compared to the recess by about 1/8 of an inch or so. This was something that I did encounter on several of the upper hull panels, specifically when everything was bolted together. They needed a slight bit of hand fitting in order to get everything to fit appropriately. Well, this here is nothing that's too out of the ordinary, and it's not something that is impossible to fix. Here I went ahead and marked it with a pencil. I'll probably go over with a Sharpie, just so I have a nice thick black line here, so I know exactly how much to remove when the procedure begins. To remove this material, I'm going to utilize a belt sander, where it's one of those tabletop mounted ones, and then I could just simply sit there and just sand away and remove the material accordingly, and then test fit it every so often to make sure I remove just enough material. Once it's done, this piece just dropped directly in place, and I can continue with the build. With the turret back in the shop, I was able to assemble the roof and also, more importantly, fabricate the roof locking system. The locks themselves are fabricated using the same technique that I've mentioned before in other videos and even earlier on with this video series here, and that's with the use of magnets. With the way the magnets work, the top deck just clips right into place, and it's held in place in a nice stern manner. If I go ahead and try to tug on it, you can see that it's not giving up and it's staying on the model. But if I need, for whatever reason, to get inside the turret, just a nice little yank, and the piece just pops right off. Just like I showcased before, the turret straps are now fitted to the model, and you can see exactly how they keep the shape of the turret roof. What was changed, of course, were the addition of these little plates. These are the ones that are supplied with the magnets. The magnets I use are the cabinet magnets, so you can find them in any home improvement store. And because the top deck portions are made from aluminum, obviously they're non-magnetic. So these plates here are just bolted in place. In order to secure them, I just drill a hole through the appropriate locations. I thread them with a tap and die, and then the fastener just threads directly in place. I snip off the extra threads, and then I could just smear a little bit of red putty on here and polish away with the bodywork. This is a much simpler way to do it in comparison to drilling a well into this area over here and dealing with an extra nut and also more work with the bodywork. So this is a easier, more efficient way to accomplish the same installation. With the camera readjusted, you can see how the magnet locks have been modified to work on the stock bracket system. These metal brackets were the ones I was mentioning before, and they basically secure to the side via the kit supply fasteners. With the way the kit's originally designed is that you have these 4 holes, or I should say these 2 holes on either side. The roof panel gets applied, and then you fasten it down in place, again with the kit supply fasteners. In order to modify it so that it has a magnet system, what I went and did was I drilled 2 holes on the bracket itself, countersunk them, and then I was able to fasten to the bracket a strip of angle aluminum. The angle aluminum is bolted in place nice and firmly, and then this is the perfect mounting location to add the cabinet magnet. The magnet is just drilled and tapped in place. And this, I tap the aluminum because it's easier to go ahead and just thread directly in, as opposed to trying to line up with an internal fastener. You can do that if need be, but it gets a little tricky when you're trying to bend your finger in there, hold it in place, and also making sure that it doesn't spin on you when you're tightening the bolt. But regardless, on this one here, it was accomplished with the tap method. While the sculpted weld beads and the remaining of the bodywork is currently setting on the turret, I could focus back on the mantlet in order to get this part complete so I can mount it to the turret along with the tube. The mantlet already has those mods that I touched upon earlier in this video, and since then the only thing I did was mount on the bushing in a permanent manner. And this leads us to the surface detailing. Starting with these holes that we have here, on the real King Tiger there would be these acorn fasteners found on these locations, and this is probably one of my favorite aspects of the Henschel production King Tiger turret. The kit supplies you with some very nicely made CNC steel acorn fasteners. These pieces have been used on other Armortek kits in the past, and they are awesome. I mean, they really do make the build shine, and it's one less thing you have to fabricate as a builder. They have the appropriate shape to them, with the acorn portion on the top, as well as they are a real fastener. As you can see, they're threaded. These are M3 fasteners. But again, for this type of an application, they are absolutely perfect. You are also going to need these for the hubcaps on the sprocket as well, and that's something I'm going to be touching upon probably in a video or two down the road. Back to the kit, you need these acorn fasteners here because on the real King Tiger, these fasteners would have been found on this location. And if anyone's wondering why, well, the fasteners themselves need to have this shape to them because if you take rounds into this portion over here, the fasteners themselves can also act to deflect an incoming projectile, which can also prevent damage to the nut itself. If the nut was flattened and it gets hit, it could bust off, and then if you need to do maintenance, it's going to be way harder than if the projectile was glanced off because of the geometry found on the piece that we have right here. So these just simply get mounted in place. Now if you notice, the holes on this one are not tapped or threaded. You just simply glue them in and you're good to go. However, that's not really all that needs to be done. To kick this up to the next level, there's a bit of detailing that I'm going to be adding to the acorns that is something that, again, is probably one of my favorite aspects on this vehicle, and you'll see why in a moment. And that bit of detailing involves the acorns that we have here, specifically how they're retained. You see, with the way the fasteners are secured to the mantlet here, I guess the engineers figured that these fasteners would have a habit of backing out due to all the vibrations from the main gun firing. So what they went ahead and did was to prevent this, they utilized a safety wire type system where it ties all of these fasteners together, which will prevent them from backing out. This detailing here is obviously not supplied with the kit, and it's something that, if added, improves the look of a King Tiger just tenfold. On smaller scale builds, it's not as important because most of the time they tend to mold this detailing in, but in something 1/6 scale, oh yeah, it's definitely going to be something that's going to be a eye-catching bit of detailing, and it's something that will easily help the look of the build overall. To do this, the first modification involves with the fastener itself. On the drill press, I went ahead and drilled out a small little hole that goes directly through the center portion of the fastener. The hole itself is a 1/16 of an inch, and this is the type of procedure that has to be done on the drill press. No other options available. If you don't have a drill press, you're not going to be able to do this job. To do the procedure, like I stated before, you need a drill press, and the drill bit is a 1/16 of an inch. Also, equally as important as the drill press is a drill press vise in order to keep this component absolutely steady and to prevent it from moving. Obviously, if this pivots or moves out of the way, you're not going to be able to drill the hole, and it's just going to cause other problems. Another thing you'll notice that I have the vise clamped onto the threaded section of the fastener. Now normally this is something that you don't want to do because you'll mar up the threads and then you're not going to be able to install the fastener to its appropriate location. But for this one, remember, like I pointed out before, the holes are slightly bigger and are not tapped, so having the threads get marred isn't really that relevant for this procedure. Before I start, I'm just going to add a little drop here of oil, or in this case, Tap Magic, which is actually a really good substance, by the way. I've been using it a lot on these recent builds, and yeah, it's definitely worth it. Quick shout out. The oil is going to prevent the bit from overheating, which will keep it sharp for a longer period of time. Also, this bit here is a brand new drill bit. This is one of those procedures where if the bit is dull or is getting old, you don't want to use it for this job because you're just going to end up with crappy results. The bit needs to be nice and sharp for it to cut, and cut in an efficient manner so it goes all the way through. If the bit is dull, the only thing you end up doing is going to overheat the piece. It's going to possibly snap the drill bit. It's not going to drill right. Again, it's just everything just just buy a $1 drill bit set and call it a day if you're going to be using this procedure. Anyway, I'm going to start up the press. Let's get this one started. And that's all there is to it. Once the fasteners are permanently held in their place via the adhesives, it's then time to go ahead and start with the braiding. The braiding is a procedure that, like I showed before in the pre-video bumper, I completely forgot how to do. Keep in mind, I don't exactly utilize this procedure all that often, if ever, and it's been about 10 years since I've done it. So needless to say, that information was long since forgotten on brain cells that are probably long since dead at this point. But even when I first attempted this technique the first time around, I learned how to do it from watching a YouTube tutorial, and so I just simply brushed up on some of my skills. After watching a couple videos, I think I'm going to be able to pull this off once again. So in order to do this technique, it's actually really simple. All you need is some thin gauge wire like this here. This is just thin fluoro wire. I have it in a spool, and you are going to need a lot of it in order to go over all of these areas. I believe this here is about 15 some odd inches, but honestly I think it might be too short, and I'm going to cut myself a longer one because it's better to have more length than shorter length, specifically when you're working on this type of a setup. The only other thing you're going to need is a small pair of needle nose pliers, and that's basically it. Okay, with the now longer piece of wire, I'm going to go ahead and start with the fastener located right here on the top. So in order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and slide the wire through to about the halfway point. And then from here, I could go ahead and take this spool, or I should say this length, and wrap it around the fastener about once or twice. Now, normally you would go ahead and start twisting it at this point, but in the smaller scale, I found it to be pretty difficult to manhandle all this extra length and prevent it from tangling and snagging. So I'm going to go ahead and do this after everything is all strung up. It's a little bit different than what you see on most other tutorials out there, but for this one, I believe this is how I did it even originally, so it's kind of coming back to me. So I guess those brain cells aren't dead after all. Alright, so I'm now going to do the same procedure here. Slide that one through. Let's try wrapping this one around again. Obviously, this is something that's going to take 1 or 2 attempts if you're lucky to pull off, but once you do, the results are going to be pretty satisfying. Okay, this goes around here. Just like that. Okay. Okay, and now that these two are strung up, I believe I could go ahead and start twisting them together. And here you can see what it looks like after the wire was twisted in its place. The twisting was something that was really hard to do on camera, so I went ahead and did it off camera with the plier that you see here. Basically, I have to hold it down like this in these two spots with my one hand, and then with the other one slip in under and then start the process of twisting this thing to the condition that you see it here. When you're twisting it, you don't want to over twist it because something like this can easily snap if it's under too much stress. So 2, 3, maybe 4 twists, if that, is really all you're going to need to accomplish this task. Once you have the thing braided, it's then time to repeat the same exact procedure all the way through until basically you're up to the last one, and you're going to need to find the way to twist it into the remaining strands. With the last section threaded, I have this little tail section that we have here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to snip it a little bit shorter and basically just wrap it into this little portion of the threads, and at that point there, the braiding is complete. And there we have it. Not sure if that's going to meet FAA guidelines, but it definitely meets ECA guidelines. So, as you can see, the braiding here really does improve the look of this detailing. And again, it's just one of the real focal points found on the King Tiger's mantlet. Well, the next step is to fabricate a small little perforated bracket which gets mounted right here on the top. I'm not really sure what this does. It's not like on later design tanks where they have provisions for mounting a searchlight or even later an infrared type unit, but for the King Tiger there is a small little bracket that would be welded to this area. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it might be used for hooking up provisions for a crane so you could, hoist this piece up, but if anyone does know, feel free to put that in the comments section listed below. As for the piece, I'm going to fabricate out of a small little strip of sheet metal, and then I'm just going to add my sculpted weld beads in my usual format. At that point there, this bad boy here is ready to head off into primer. With the turret roof ironed out, it's now time to focus on the second leg of the turret's bodywork. This would include the deletion of the fastener location holes that we see here on the top corner. In addition to the deletion of these holes, I also went ahead and added red putty to these two areas here on the turret side, and the same is also found on the opposite side of the model. You see, with the way Armortek produces these kits, they have a flat plate of aluminum, and then they go ahead and put in this very large industrial press in order to give it the appropriate curvature which is needed for the turret. Well, one of the side effects from this procedure is that you are going to have two noticeable crimp lines found on these two locations here, where obviously the press clamped down on the metal to form the bend. The lines are noticeable, however, are something that can easily be polished away with a little bit of red putty, and that's what you see here. I just went up and down with a little smear, and then once the putty fully set, I polished it away with the sandpaper, leaving for the seamless appearance that is hopefully going to happen once everything is finally primed. One other quick tip I want to mention is that when you're doing the body work on one of these King Tiger turrets, one trick is to put it on top of a garbage can like I have here, so that when you're sanding down and polishing down the putty areas, all of that putty dust just goes straight down into the trash can, and it makes for an easier cleanup. You can also see the weld starting to take shape on the vehicle. I have here the welds on the front. There's another one here on the machine gun guard on the opposite side, as well as you have the vertical ones going up. There are way more welds that still need to be added. With the turret sides heading off into its final home stretch of bodywork, I could focus now on the last remaining details which are going to be added to the turret sides, which are going to be the spare track hangers. The kit supply parts consist of the following two units. Well, you actually get a lot more, it's just that these are the two types of parts that you need to install to the turret sides. On the bottom portion here, we have the track link pin holder, and it actually secures the track links to the side of the turret. And then on the top portion here, we have the actual hangers. The holders are made from CNC'd aluminum, and they are pre-drilled and tapped. They do have their appropriate shape and size to them, and are really pretty good to go out of the box. The hangers themselves are also nicely designed with the material choice and also with their geometry. They're made from a single stamping of very thick gauge steel and are pre-drilled out in order for you to secure them to the model. In order to secure them to the model, however, I am going to make a slight change from the way the kit is designed. But the way the kit is designed, you actually have an external Allen cap screw fastener that secures it to the inside via a nut. Although this does a great job in keeping the component mounted to the model, it does hurt the accuracy slightly because you have that exposed fastener, while on the real vehicle these would just been welded to the side of the turret. For the model here, I'm going to be replicating this by modifying the piece with the way it's mounted. As you can see, I went ahead and drilled a countersunk section into the piece of steel, and this is going to house a countersunk fastener. Once the unit is fastened to the side of the model, I can then blend this in with the bodywork and then add the sculpted weld beads. Once everything is completed, it's going to have a nice seamless look, which will be more prototypical to the real vehicle. Same thing is also true for the blocks. Not so much with having to re-drill them or anything. The only thing I'm going to add to them is just a little bit of sculpted welds around the sections where it makes contact with the turret sides. And here's the track mounting equipment secured to the model, and at this point here, they're waiting for their sculpted weld beads. On the hooks themselves, you'll see that I went ahead and plugged up the countersink hole for the fasteners that I mentioned before. This was done with a little smear of just red putty, and then was sanded flush to the format that we see here. The lugs themselves were secured to the tank via fasteners, again, as per the kit. Along with the rear track mounting brackets, the front brackets were secured on too. While on this topic, one thing I want to mention is with the way the pieces get secured. You see, these pieces are really susceptible to being mounted by the builder in a canted manner. If this happens, this can cause problems for both aesthetics as well as with functionality. Obviously, for aesthetics, if the pieces are on in a skewed manner, and the real ones are supposed to be straight, this is clearly going to hurt the look of the model. But more importantly for functionality, keep in mind these pieces are not just for detail, but they are fully functional. Here I have some sections of spare track, and with the way the kit is designed, you are going to have lots of spare tracks, which is a good thing. And the way they secure to the model is the way they work on the real one. Basically, you take your section of track and you hang them on the two hangers. Then the track lower link here gets pinned in place into this retention block. The retention block works on the model as it does on the real tank. You have your link pin, and you basically guide it through, and once it's in place, it keeps the bottom link from flopping it around, and it also does the secondary duty in keeping the spare tracks in place and prevents them from falling off when the vehicle's in operation. Of course, with the track rack secured to the model, the next logical step is to add the sculpted weld beads. The weld beads are added in the exact same manner as are the other weld beads that have been touched upon before in this video, and have also been referenced in many of the other videos that are found on this channel. They are added to both the front and the rear sections of the track racks, not to mention they are also a mirror image found on the opposite side of the turret. But probably one of the more unique aspects of the King Tiger turret weld beads are the ones that are found here on the front. On the real King Tiger, you have these 4 lugs that are found on each side of the front trunnion area, and these lugs are cylindrical in their shape, and then they are welded in place like the way you see it here. What's interesting about the Armortek King Tiger is that Armortek themselves give you 4 fasteners that secure the sides to the front armor plate, much along the ways that it's done on the real one. Because of this feature, you have no guesswork in order to add the weld beads. The fasteners are in the exact same locations as they would be on the real vehicle, so all you got to do is once the fasteners are added, you simply just plug up the fastener face portion of the surface, and then just add the sculpted weld beads in these 4 locations. Of course, this is a mirror image on the opposite side. Once it's done, it gives you for this very unique bit of detailing that's a staple found on these Henschel production King Tiger turrets. Also at this time, the mantlet has been permanently attached to the barrel system. This is facilitated with the kit assembly method, where you have a single flush fastener found on the bottom portion here, and it threads into place, gripping onto the tube section, keeping everything at bay. The installation was super easy. However, one thing that I did notice was that the kit supplied grub fastener was a bit too long, so that if you use the kit one, you are going to have a bit of material protruding from the bottom. In order to correct this, all I did was I took the fastener and I just shortened it about a 1/4 of an inch or so, and then with that material removed, I was able to then rethread it into its appropriate location, and it leaves for a seamless fit like you see here. And while on the topic of the weld beads, this brings us back to the top deck. Since the last video, the weld beads have been added to the appropriate locations, which would be found on this top section. On a King Tiger, it's a little bit different compared to the Tiger 1, which, as we can recall, it's 2 halves like that are welded in the center. On the King Tiger, it's still 2 plates, but they're staggered in this type of a format. This is present on the Armortek kit, so adding the weld beads to these locations is very easily done, and you don't have to do any guesswork. However, although the weld beads have been added to these sections, the top deck is still fully removable, the same as it was before. If I just grab the plate and overpower the magnets, top deck pops right off. And you can see that the weld beads do not inhibit in any way, shape, or form the functionality of this part. But if I go ahead and put the top deck back on, the weld beads completely conceal the seams which are present on these panels, which were seen in the previous videos. With the turret placed back onto the tank, you can see just how much the side detailing really gets to be appreciated. With the front and the sides basically out of the way, I could now work and focus on the remainder of the detailing found on the rear portion here, as well as also on the roof of the turret. But more information on this is to come in the next video update. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled German King Tiger heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again for watching. Catch you on the next one.